Here's one question that I hear from a whole lot of new riders. Can you recommend a good starting motorcycle? You know, the pandemic's got a lot of product availability and services out of whack, especially if you're looking to get into motorcycling. Training classes are filled up because there's just a backlog of riders looking to get their license. Some motorcycles can be hard to find, and a lot of them are on back order at dealers due to shortages of parts and labor. This has caused an increase in the cost of used motorcycles, so it's important as ever to make a smart choice if you're looking to start your riding journey. And this week, we'll do the best we can to realistically speaking to the issue of helping you find the right motorcycle to start out on. Now, I'll give you some information on the different types of motorcycles available, and at the end, you'll have more information on what types of motorcycles are available and maybe what types of motorcycles best fit your needs and your abilities. If you're not a member of MCrider, I want to encourage you to join MCrider at mcrider.com/member. You'll get access to thousands of riders all over the world who want to get better on two wheels as well, and access to the field guide with training exercises to practice these skills on any open parking lot. When someone asks what's a good starter motorcycle, and there's a whole lot of follow information needed to help that rider make an informed decision. The first question you want to ask is, what do you want to do on the motorcycle? Is it for commuting to work? Will you ride in the city or long stretches on the highway? Is it for riding trails and off-road? Or do you want to get into racing out on the track? All of that plays an important role in finding the motorcycle that best suits your needs. Now, the next question, especially trying to help someone online to make that decision, is what's your physical size? Now, I'd have a totally different recommendation for a rider who's 5 feet tall and 105 pounds compared to a rider who's 6'2" and 250 pounds. Different motorcycles are better suited for riders depending on the size of the rider. The next thing you want to evaluate is what's your riding ability. Now, this one's especially hard, and it's impossible for me to tell online about your riding abilities. It's difficult sometimes to honestly evaluate our own riding abilities. Maybe a good place to start is to ask your riding coach for an honest evaluation after the MSF class. Rider coaches see riders come through a class all the time of different riding abilities, and not all new riders start at the same skill level. So depending on, how well you're performing on the training motorcycles in the MSF class, maybe there's some variance in what motorcycles could be recommended as your first bike. So you can see that having a recommended first motorcycle for every rider is a difficult question to answer, because the new rider who wants to commute on their motorcycle, who's 6 feet, 200 pounds, and has a natural aptitude towards riding, would get a different bike recommendation than a rider who wants to ride trails who's 5'2" and 110 pounds, but is really struggling with some of the basics in motorcycle control. Two different riders, two different needs, two different physical sizes, probably two different recommendations for what would be a good starter motorcycle for those riders. And we haven't even mentioned what kind of motorcycles look good to you, or if you have a brand preference. Some people are stuck on a certain brand of motorcycle, or the thousands of other things that could come into play in you picking the motorcycle that's right for you. So in order to do this video some justice, we'll talk in broad strokes and hopefully provide good information for you to make an informed decision on your first motorcycle purchase. There are three basic types of motorcycles: street, dual purpose, and off-highway. Within each of these broad types of motorcycles, there are all different kinds of power options, sizes, and price ranges. Since MCrider deals with riding on the street, we'll look primarily at street motorcycles and a little at dual purpose motorcycles. And if you don't know, a dual purpose motorcycle just means that it can be ridden on the street and also some light duty trail rides. So not a full-fledged dirt bike, but also a little more dirt oriented than a typical street motorcycle might be. So let's focus on street motorcycles first, and we'll further break that category down into standard motorcycles, sport, cruisers, touring, and scooters. Now, you'll find some motorcycles that fit perfectly into one of these categories and some that kind of blur the line between one category and the next. but we'll give a basic description of these different categories of motorcycles. First, let's talk about standard motorcycles. They offer all-around capabilities. They're sometimes called naked bikes. You'll hear them referred to naked bikes because they don't have a whole lot of plastics or fairings on the side of it. The power characteristics of these motorcycles are, vary, and they come in all different sizes and weights. The seating position on the standard is generally pretty neutral, with your back fairly straight up, maybe a slight forward lean to it on some standards. Standard motorcycle makes a good city motorcycle because they're generally lighter weight, they're easy to maneuver, and they can also be on the more economical side of some of the others categories. Sport bikes are made for an aggressive forward-leading body position. The motorcycle will have foot pegs further back on the motorcycle, so you feel like you're kind of laying down on the tank. They have big plastic fairings or side panels that help the motorcycle cut through the wind. They're generally a lighter weight, and they focus on speed and power over being able to spend long days in the saddle riding those motorcycles. So sport bike is probably not going to be your first choice if you're wanting to travel across country. Now, cruisers are the most popular segment of motorcycles in the U.S. If you know what a Harley looks like, you have a good idea what a cruiser is. They've got the classic styling, a very relaxed, laid-back riding position. Your foot position is either straight down under your knees or a lot of times forward, so they have forward controls and pegs. And your riding position, you're either straight up and down or you're a little bit laid back on a cruiser. Now, just about every major manufacturer has a cruiser in their lineup. Harley's probably the most famous, but there's cruisers from all the other manufacturers as well. Touring bikes, like my Goldwing in the background there, they're big motorcycles with a whole lot of amenities for long days of traveling on the motorcycle. They're heavy bikes in general with big engines and a lot of wind protection for the rider and the passenger. So if you know what that Goldwing looks like, you have a good idea of what a touring motorcycle is, because that's one of the classic touring bikes out there, but touring bikes are made by a lot of manufacturers as well. Scooters have a step-through design. They're usually an automatic transmission, they have smaller wheels, and they're perfect for riding around the city in really dense populated areas. They're small, lightweight motorcycles, and they offer probably the lowest hurdle for new riders to get comfortable on, as you don't have to deal with shifting gears or a clutch on a scooter generally, and the front and rear brake controls are up on the handlebars. They usually offer some storage underneath the seat, but they're just great in really compact environments or inner city vehicles. Scooters work great in those environments. So my first word of advice for a rider looking for their first motorcycle is understanding what type of riding you want to do and where you're going to be riding it at, and then finding that broad category of motorcycles that best fits that requirement. And within each of these broad segments of motorcycles, there's a wide range of bikes with different power to weight ratios, prices, and engine characteristics. But what can also make it confusing for some riders is that you can't rely on the size of the engine alone to make the right decision. A 600cc cruiser and a 600cc sport motorcycle are not the same animal, not even close. While a larger sized rider with good skills may be able to start out on a 600cc cruiser, I would never recommend a Ninja ZX6R, it's also a 600cc motorcycle, to a new rider. Though the engines carry roughly the same cc's, they're different animals when you roll on the throttle. So generally, a new rider wants a motorcycle that is lower on engine power, lighter weight, and easier to handle. Now, this will change some depending on the physical size and weight of the rider, but that doesn't mean that a bigger rider has to start on a large, heavy cruiser either, or that a smaller motorcycle cannot handle a larger rider. I've got a Yamaha XT250 in the background. It's a small dual-purpose motorcycle, and it's capable of getting me up to the legal speed limit on any street here in Fort Worth, Texas. So you hear a lot of riders say, well, 250 is too small. Well, I can ride that one all over the city and keep up with traffic as well. So taking into consideration your purpose for riding, your physical size, and your current riding abilities, As a beginner, you can begin to make an informed decision on the types of motorcycles that appeal to you. Now, it's harder to talk about specific motorcycles in a video like this, but it's much easier for me to do on a web page. So I'm going to create a list of motorcycles that can help you start narrowing down your decision on what type of motorcycle might be best suited for you as a new rider. Go to mcrider.com/firstbike. So mcrider.com/firstbike. And I'll have a chart with some examples of motorcycles that fit into each category. This won't be a comprehensive list, and it's not even a recommendation for me to buy a particular motorcycle, but it will help you narrow down what you're looking for and maybe help give you a better idea on where to look. So in that chart, for instance, for standard motorcycles, I'll show you standard motorcycles for smaller riders, for bigger riders, and some for riders who have a ways to go developing their skills and control, to some that might be better suited for, we'll call it an advanced beginner for lack of a better term, and I'll try to add links where relevant so that you can get more information on a particular motorcycle. From there, it will be up to you to be honest with yourself on your current needs and your riding abilities to make a responsible decision with your first motorcycle. But let me end this video with this word of advice. If you're new to riding, you'll likely make a huge mistake if you buy your dream motorcycle as your first purchase. I guess that might not be true if your dream motorcycle is a Yamaha XT250. I always recommend to new riders of buying a used motorcycle first and mastering it before moving on to something else. I'm a member of a few other forums specifically for new riders, and I often hear riders on the forums say that they bought a Rebel 250 and within a month they had outgrown it. That's a bunch of baloney. My first thought when I hear somebody say that is, how are you determining that you outgrew it? Is it because you can ride it in a straight line and take broad curves and stop at a stop sign without falling over? Well, in my book, that's not mastering a motorcycle, and if you believe it is, you're setting yourself up for further problems down the road. Learn to ride. Learn to ride and master the techniques of riding on a smaller motorcycle. Get the field guide and practice swerving. Do 20 and 18-foot U-turns. Be able to turn sharply from a stop and stop in a curve. And be able to stop it in a straight line in an emergency without locking up the tires. All of that is easier to learn on a smaller motorcycle. It's cheaper, and you're not as worried when you tip over, and you will tip over. And then when you've mastered control of the motorcycle, you'll have the proper technique that you can start looking to move up. If you focus on the proper technique on a cheaper, smaller motorcycle and practice with the field guide to master the riding exercises found there, not only will you learn to ride faster, but once you do get that bigger motorcycle, you'll be leaps and bounds beyond any of the other riders that started on that bigger motorcycle. It's too big and too expensive and too powerful for a new rider to learn confidently on. Trust me on this one, I've seen it hundreds of times. Till next week, guys, it's Kevin with MC Rider, and I'll see you on the road.